Ulug' Rabbim ijobat qil, yiroqda ana duosini. Ulug' Rabbim ijobat qil, zindonda ota duosini. Ulug' Rabbim ijobat qil, musafir yetim duasini. Ulug' Rabbim ijobat qil, vatansiz g'arib duasini. Ulug' Rabbim nasib ayla, ko'rishga vatan azodini. Ulug' Rabbim nasib ayla, ko'rishga zolim zavolini. Ulug' Rabbim nasib ayla, ko'rishga onam jamolini. Ulug' Rabbim nasib ayla, suyishga vatan tuprog'ini. Ulug' Rabbim nasib ayla, kezishga vatan gulbog'ini. Ulug' Rabbim nasib ayla, vatan tuprog'ida o'lishni.
Assalamu alaikum, dear brothers and sisters, and welcome to another special episode of Talk is Turkestan. We have a very, very special guest for us today. We are really honored to have him. Just like in the ad I've mentioned, we have Brother Moazzam Begg. Before I get him on, for those of you who may not know who Brother Moazzam Begg is, he is a British-born Muslim who was held as an enemy combatant in extrajudicial detention by the US government in Bagram and Guantanamo Bay for nearly 3 years. Released without charge, he went on to become an author, public speaker, media commentator, and outreach director of CAGE, a London-based advocacy organization that aims to empower communities impacted by the war on terror. In 2019, he was included in the Muslim 500, a listing of the most influential Muslims in the world. So without further ado, I'd like to say Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, brother. How are you today?
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, Brother Arsalan. It's my pleasure and honor to be on Talk is Turkestan, and I pray that this is a beneficial episode for us all, inshallah.
Thank you so much for joining me today. I mean, in our Muslim community, you are one of the most well-known and quite successful in your advocacy. And that's why I wanted you on to talk about on the Uyghurs. I mean, you've talked about the Uyghurs, but you've actually haven't been on a show with a Uyghur. So this is a first for you, inshallah, and hopefully it'll be beneficial for us. Yeah, so I'll get started with the questions. I don't want to waste too much time. You, even before these before these concentration camps, you used to talk about the Uyghurs. Why do you speak about the Uyghurs, and why is it important to highlight the Uyghurs' plight, especially today in 2020?
Primarily, it is because my first encounter with the Uyghurs was actually in Pakistan, where there were significant numbers of them, and indeed in Afghanistan, where I was in the early 2000s. And I came across them and heard something of their plight, but didn't really understand it properly until I was detained with some of them and was imprisoned with some of them in Guantanamo. So there were 22 of them in all in Guantanamo. Understanding the origins of the Uyghur people, who they are, the confusion in the minds of people. Still to this day, there are so many people who call Uyghurs Chinese, which is insulting, because they are an independent race. They're the original natures of the Turks. You know, most people don't even know that the original Turks come from Turkestan al-Sharqiyya, or East Turkestan, which is what your show is of course based on and all about. And it was the migration of the Turks right across Asia, Central Asia and Asia Minor, which eventually ended up in Turkey today. And most people don't understand that the Turkic people spread right across Turkmenistan, Turkestan, and all that region, Uzbekistan, and Azerbaijan, and all of these regions are Turkic-speaking spaces, but they originated from the Turks. Indeed, my name itself, Beg or Beg, is one of the derivatives of the name Beg, which is itself Bey, which itself is a tribal chief, which is where my family claimed to come from. So all of these reasons are to do with the connection. And of course, the other connection, the most important connection for me is as a Muslim, that this is part of the Muslim world. The language of the East Turkistanis is an Arabic script. It's not a Mandarin script or a Cantonese script, which is attempted to be imposed upon the people of Turkestan, East Turkestan. They are an indigenous people, they are a sovereign people, and they are a unique people. And it's something I've come to learn the more I've sort of explored it. And as I said, we'll talk about later, the role of the Guantanamo Uyghurs for me has been crucial because it's really connected me to their struggle. And meeting them and talking to them quite regularly has helped to inform that people.
As you've mentioned, the Uyghurs are a part of this ummah, or at least we think. But recently we've seen in the UN, mostly Western non-Muslim countries supporting, or secular nations supporting the Uyghurs and their plight. But you have, I don't like to use the term, I don't know where you stand on this, but I don't like to use the term Islamic country or Sharia country. I like to use the term Muslim majority country. These Muslim majority countries are really silent, and a lot of those, including Turkey, where we're ethnically and religiously tied, Pakistan, neighboring East Turkestan, and obviously you've got the Gulf nations as well.
I mean, look, this is a very, very important point, and it is a point of shame. I find it a point of deep, deep shame. Especially, for example, Imran Khan is somebody I've met, before he became prime minister. He campaigned against Guantanamo. He campaigned on people like Afia Siddiqui, who was detained by the Americans. He campaigned against the war on terror and the use of the drone strikes. And yet, when he was asked, and repeatedly asked, about the role of China in relation to its treatment of the Uyghur people, and indeed Pakistani citizens who were married to Uyghurs, who were not given their rights, who were not allowed, who themselves were detained, he claimed that he didn't know what was happening, he didn't know what was going on, and that he advises in private. Now, I can understand the advises in private thing because he's tried to dislocate Pakistan from American policy, which would destroy it. But you can't do that by feigning ignorance and pretending you don't know what's going on. When he said that, it was a huge smack in the face of all the Muslims who had any hope in him at all. And further, it emboldened China to think that a country that's like this, that has been very vocal on the war on terrorism, can allow China to get away with the same language. It's really important. Xi Jinping had said openly that we must endorse the language and use the language of George Bush's war on terror in order to fight, quote unquote, the extremism or terrorism that is Islam. And when the Chinese government can openly say that Islam is a mental disease, the second largest religion in the world, then it has insulted those very nations who claim to be even Muslim majority. We won't call them Islamic, we won't call them Muslim, we call them Muslim majority. It's insulted even that. And the fact that they can essentially bow down to China's will in all of this because of the economic power it has is shocking. Because China doesn't wield any military power. It doesn't threaten nations like America did or the Soviet Union did with military power. China is not expansionist in that way. It is through its economics. So it's only for the love of money. In the end, the Muslim countries, it's for the love of money. And that is really, really depressing and shameful.
It's really cringing to have sometimes the likes of, say, Donald Trump or his administration at least support Uyghurs, but at the same time, trying to make deals, normalizing relationships with Israel. Then you have China supporting Palestinians against Israel. Then you've got France, which supports Uyghurs, but then will, close down 200 odd Muslim organizations and threaten them, with deportation. It's just a crazy world that we're living in. How do we break this down? It's so confusing for me.
This is called Realpolitik. It's in Arabic. It's called nifaq al-siyasa, which means the hypocrisy of politics, and that's exactly what it is. That on the one hand, those nations who are actively engaged in the war on terror, those who are actively engaged in denying Muslims their rights, will use a Muslim cause, because the Uyghur cause is a Muslim cause, if any there was, because it's not a nationalist cause, it's not a tribal cause, it's a Muslim cause because of this. The Muslims of China, East Turkestan, are being forced literally to renounce the Shahada, to eat pork, to drink alcohol, to have relations out of wedlock, and all of these things, to indoctrinate them through their mind. So if ever there was a war against Islam, the others you could argue that there are, the war on terror or what's connected to it could have been to do with politics and the attacks and so forth. But here, this is really about, the Chinese government openly says this is about Islam. And so in relation to all of these other countries who do different things, it's shocking when you hear that Saudi Arabia has sent back people to be tortured, Uyghurs to be tortured, or the United Arab Emirates, or Turkey, or Pakistan, and that the Western nations won't do that. The Western nations won't send back people to China, because they will say this person is likely to get arbitrarily detained, tortured, or executed. And this is, again, it's the Realpolitik, and we are stuck in between. And I feel bad for the Uyghur people who understand that it is abusers like the United States of America who speak on our behalf, because there's nobody else doing it from the Muslim world.
And like, if you notice in Chinese state-run media, and a lot of people who are not caught up with the issue tend to not believe in what's happening to the Uyghurs, because they go, oh, look, the United States is supporting you. How come the Muslims are not supporting, the Muslim majority nations are not supporting you? There's something fishy going on here. And we're like, look, as you mentioned, this type of politics, and it's working on China's behalf.
Indeed, it is. Indeed. And what it's doing, of course, the first thing it's doing is that it's showing it's showing that Muslim states, and because I believe firmly that Muslim people are behind the people of East Turkestan. But Muslim states, most of them are run by dictators or people who are imposed upon the people. And so they're not representative of them. They're certainly not representative of Islam. And so they can say, yes, we support China. They've even signed statements, as you know, that supports China's treatment of the Uyghur people, which is the most shocking thing one can imagine. And that Donald Trump's government has actually put members of the Chinese Communist Party under financial sanctions. So you think to yourself, this is a ridiculous parody. And where do the rights of the Uyghur people there stand? And who then can blame them for seeking support if the Muslim world seems to abandon them? Now, those who hold on to their faith from amongst the Uyghurs, I think, will know that even if you take support from the United States of America, it comes at a cost. And that cost is your cause. Your cause in itself will then become hijacked, as France and others have attempted to do. And that is the caution that I would give to my brothers and sisters from the community of East Turkestan.
Something that's been really close to your heart, what happened in Bosnia 25 years ago. The Muslims united to free Bosnia diplomatically as well as physically. Why don't we see this when it comes to the Uyghurs?
This is a very good point. Just to say that it's also in Burma is a similar situation where you don't see any kind of physical response. There's all sorts of reasons. One is that I have to say, at the time of Bosnia, the West, as it were, was at least in lip service on the side of the Muslims, not because they were Muslims, but because the Serbs themselves were pro USSR or pro Russia, and that was kind of the end of the Cold War. And again, Muslims were kind of placed in between, in the midst of this Cold War, as it were. I remember being in Bosnia at the time, going there, and I openly say I joined the Mujahideen to help to fight against the Bosnian Serbs and the war crimes they were carrying out against the Muslims. But there were British United Nations, there were Malaysians, Turks, Pakistanis, Bangladeshis, Norwegians. They were all there. In fact, the Srebrenica massacre happened under the watch of the Dutch United Nations. And of course, this was happening in the heart of Europe. You could get to Bosnia from a 2 days drive from Britain, where I live, and there was no sense that there was this going to would have sparked an internal a war between the worlds, as well, a war between the Western world and the communist world, or the dying communist world. Here in Turkestan, that's exactly what the fear is. There's not even a sense of any. People won't even put on financial sanctions, let alone threaten militarily that if you do this to these people, we will intervene, bring in a force. The United Nations is not even talking about that, and that's because China as a nation is very powerful. It's a nuclear nation. It's one of the big five. It's one of the permanent members of the Security Council, and it has a huge economic power. It requires nations, not one nation, but several nations with the basic understanding of Islamic connection and the basic understanding that these people are being forced to renounce their shahada. And even the Americans didn't do that to us. The Americans didn't force you to renounce your shahada. This is how bad it is. And if people in Saudi Arabia who call themselves Khadim al-Haramain al-Sharifain, the protectors, the custodians of the two holy places, can't even say a word about that, then you have to check their iman to begin with. If you can't say a single thing, it isn't because somebody's got a boot over your head or is trying to force you to remain silent. It's because you are a coward and you have sold out your deen.
With that, as you mentioned, you just said that the Americans never forced you to, renounce your shahada. I mean, the comparison between Guantanamo and what's happening to the Uyghurs has been made by you and many others. I don't like to compare, but just for argument's sake, what would you say, like comparing these two atrocious places? How would you compare the two, having gone through Guantanamo and what you've heard and what you know about the Uyghur situation?
Well, that's a really good question, because you said earlier on that I've not been on with Uyghurs, but I have once, and that is my Uyghur brothers who were in Guantanamo. Not on your show, but onto another show. We spoke about this very subject, and there were 22 Uyghurs in Guantanamo, and so people are aware they were handed over without any legal process by the governments of Pakistan and Afghanistan for a bounty. In other words, for money. No other reason. The Americans quickly recognized and accepted that the Uyghurs were not a threat to the United States of America. They recognized it. But what was the problem? These 22 Uyghurs couldn't be sent anywhere. Even though they were picked up in Pakistan, Afghanistan, and neighboring countries where they were living fine, normal lives, once the war on terror happened, they were handed over. And the handing over meant now that America had to find a place for these brothers to go to. And America was struggling. So they were sent to places like, I am sure majority of your viewers would not even be able to recognize on the map of the globe, an island called Palau, 500 miles east of the east coast of the Philippines, a tiny little island. 6 of them were sent there. 2 of them sent to El Salvador, of all places. Others sent to Albania. 4 sent to Bermuda. And I mean, literally, they were finding tiny little islands in the greatest oceans in the world to dump these Uyghurs in. Now, I know many of these brothers, and alhamdulillah, they're strong and they're good, but if I listen to their stories, and when they tell me their stories, Guantanamo was a walk in the park. It was a walk in the park, and I'll repeat it again. Despite the fact that the Americans abused us, they beat us, they abused the Quran, they stripped us naked. All these things did happen. But the Americans still have come from a tradition where they understand, or they believe in many Americans believe in God. Many Americans read the Bible. Many Americans understand that they, at some point, historically speaking, were also persecuted and then came to escape that persecution from Catholic Europe. But what you have in China, my brother and my dear brothers and sisters watching, is ilhad. It is pure, unadulterated disbelief in any system of religion, and that it is, in fact, it's a hatred for religion that's almost causing this to happen. Because every country that you go to, even the least developed ones around the world in Asia or Africa, will give you the basic freedoms to practice your religion. Basic freedoms. And China is taking that away. Now, the brothers from Guantanamo who've been resettled around the world, that they have been the first to speak about this because they understand from a place of what it's like to be tortured. But yet, it's an irony, isn't it? You've mentioned that the Americans who abused them are the ones that are actually speaking out the loudest against the Chinese government. And that's the great irony and the oxymoron, or whatever you want to call it.
And I'm glad that you pointed this out, because I've actually been on some communist apologists podcasts, and they were like, how can you compare the two? And clearly now we have evidence from a former detainee, just how bad this really is. We can talk about the oppression all day, but what seems to be happening is many have been following in China's footsteps. For example, the Modi regime with Kashmir, and with Indian Muslims themselves. Then you got France also sort of slowly implementing that. You've got certain things happening in the UK also, but just like compared to China, it's nothing. But this could eventually end up around the world, some form of oppression like this happening to local Muslim populations.
I want you to understand this, okay, and think about this and think about this carefully. The guy who walked into the two massages, uh, uh, oh, sorry. Sorry. Yeah. The guy who walked into the mosques in New Zealand, in Christchurch and Linwood, and shot to death, scores of Muslims, did so listening to, at the time when he was live streaming, and he was listening to songs rather, and some of those songs were celebrating people like Radovan Karadzic, who was a convicted war criminal for the massacres in Bosnia during the 90s. In his manifesto, he actually says, remember, this is a far right, somebody from the right, not from the left, not from the communist side at all, from the opposite of communism. He actually praises the Chinese government for its treatment of the Uyghur people. Now, how is that possible that somebody from the far right can praise somebody from the far left for what they do to? And the answer is, it doesn't matter. In his warped world, the reason why he was listening to songs that celebrated Radovan Karadzic, remember, the Muslims of Bosnia, they're all white. They're white, Slavic, blonde-haired, blue-eyed, and he hates anybody that's not white. So why is he celebrating their death? And the answer is because him, Modi, Xi Jinping, Trump, and all of the other Islamophobes, they see us as one. And the sad part is that I wish we saw ourselves the way such people see us. Because if we did, we'd be able to come together and challenge them in the way that they see us. And that's really the saddest part of it all.
Wow. That's a very interesting, subhanallah, you're right. They see us as one, but just amongst us, like just within like ethnic groups, we've got like so many different sects, subhanallah. Wow, it's a very good point. All right, we could talk about this all day. What has Cage done, or what is Cage planning? Do you guys have any plans regarding the Uyghurs? Or
Yeah, so
obviously with COVID, there are many restrictions. You can't really do much.
So last year we had a tour, and again, this was based upon, I thought, Cage has been talking about the war on terrorism, and I thought, how do we talk about the Uyghurs when it doesn't apparently seem to be as the war on terrorism? But the truth is that it is part of the war on terror, because they've adopted the language of the war on terrorism. And so what we did around the world, not around the world, around the UK, we did a series of talks. We got sister, her name is from Canada, Ruqayya Tudrush, who came, and she gave a series of talks about her personal experiences. And we had one of the former Guantanamo brothers, Uyghur Khalil Mahmoud, who also came, and we did a joint tour with a brother here called Dili Hussein from Five Pillars, who also has been speaking extensively at universities about the issue of the Uyghurs. And we took the tour to several cities. And I have to tell you that every event was ram-packed. People were beginning to learn. They still didn't know enough, but they were beginning to learn, and they were learning from small tidbits from people's lives, how they'd been affected. And then that allowed people from the Uyghur community, the smaller Uyghur community here in the UK, to also come out and give some testimony. Now, we're a very, very, very long way away from any kind of solution, and I don't know how any solution will come without some kind of force, without some kind of threat to the Chinese government that they'll accept. And so what I ask people to do is, those people who have some kind of connection to those in power, is to continue with that pressure, especially from the Pakistani community, because there is a place I think you can get some something. You can force the prime minister to say something, because there is a geographical connection, there's a physical connection, there's a religious connection, and that he's already been put on the spot. With the other nations, I don't have a great deal of hope. There is, of course, with Turkey, we could get some pressure from there, maybe Qatar. I mean, I don't know, but try there. The Western countries will continue to push as they were, but not because they love Muslims. It's because they don't like China. And the Muslims are a pawn in all of this, unfortunately. So I'm not saying that we have to have some idealistic, all-encompassing Muslim unity, but we need to get unity from some quarters, and I think we need to work on those. One thing that Sister Ruqayya did say is that she got people to actually say, do you agree that in your personal life, what you will do is that you will boycott Chinese goods, and at least make that on a personal level of sacrifice as much as is possible, which is a very hard thing to do when you're buying anything you want to buy from eBay or Amazon. It comes almost automatically from China. It takes some kind of personal sacrifice to make that extra effort to say, I will not do it. So there's just a handful of things I can tell you to do.
Let's get a question from one of our audience. We both know this brother, brother Subur Ahmed. He says, Moazzam, would you say the Uyghur situation requires a collective effort of Muslims and non-Muslims, like the Bosnian situation in the 90s? We sort of covered it before, but is there anything that you wanted to add to that?
The only thing I would say is that Bosnia was a physical war taking place. There was a war taking place, and people were being killed, literally massacred. And the difference, I guess now, I mean, even at that time, there was no social media. So when we'd find out, because people would go there, physically film, come back, show the film in the masajid and in the school, on television and so forth. And that's what kind of mobilized people. With China, it's such a closed society. Even though it has the more CCTV per square inch than any place in the world, it is very close to what you can get to see. And what's coming out, I think, is just a fraction of the reality. The problem is access. How do you get to China? How do you get activists to go there, to campaign, to defend, to document? How do you get people to come in there when even BBC and CNN or the New York Times, when they get there, they keep talking about how they're constantly monitored, stopped, searched, their films are often destroyed and so forth. So we're getting tidbits of information, but if you were to, we've got to work on something. And I just wanted to mention one case. It's really important, if you allow me. The case of Hussein Jalil. He's a Canadian, and my wife, she's Canadian, so she knows the family very well. And he was on a trip to Uzbekistan in 2007, was handed over by the Uzbek government to the Chinese. Now he's a Canadian citizen. Now, bearing in mind, thus far we've been talking about how the Muslim world has done very little. Here now is a Canadian citizen who's been held in extrajudicial detention. We have no idea of what crime he's committed for 13 years. His kids have all grown up not knowing almost what a father is. And so there's a Western nation that can do nothing, really has done very little. They say that we are campaigning or doing things for him, but it's taken 13 to 14 years for them to even do anything. So this is a global problem. China is a global monster, and it will take a global effort to tame this monster.
I've always said, and you may not agree with me, some do, some don't, that the virus has somewhat been a blessing in disguise, because when we talk about China, people will go, okay, then go about their business. I was on BBC radio like this time last year, and the presenter asked me, what do you think we should do about China? I said, we should boycott Chinese goods. And the guy literally almost laughed in my face. But when the virus came along, it was quite easy to boycott China. So would you say, or would you agree with me that the virus has, spread advocacy? And how do we advocate further? Because generally speaking, from my experience, Muslims I don't know what it is. It's like, oh, let's leave it up to Allah. Let's wait for Mahdi. This sort of, waiting for a hero to come along, but where we should technically all play our part.
I mean, one of the things that China already does to the Uyghur people is that if there's any form of resistance, whether it's vocal or armed even, they smash the entire community. In fact, they use that as an excuse for what they're doing now. So this whole thing has been going on for some time. And the people that I've spoken to from East Turkestan, they have said that we have tried whatever we can do. And there is no movement, and still there are movements. Of course, there are movements within the Uyghurs who are fighting for their rights, but they need support from outside. And it's how does that support manifest itself? What we need to do, I think, my view is to build a movement, of Muslims around the world. And one thing, like you said, Muslims they'll feel quite safe. You know why? Because the West is on board. The moment you say the West is on board, and you won't get in trouble, and there'll be no issues, and the security services won't be detaining you and stopping you at airports and arresting you and creating laws for you that only apply to you, you'll be okay. So there's nothing to worry about. We need to put that language out and say, listen, guys, we know that you're a bunch, I don't want to say it in this way, but you're a bunch of cowards anyway. So at least don't worry, you can do something for the Uyghurs, because the West is on side. And the moment they jump ship, you can jump ship with them. But up until that time, you can feel safe that the West is with you, and that you won't get troubled. So I think we're in safe ground in that regard.
Exactly. I'm constantly using these three words: Western military intervention. And we're safe to use that now. If we were talking about any other country, we'd be banned from Facebook, Twitter, and we'd be probably detained and questioned, which this has never happened to me. But because the West, you've got Jewish lobby, Zionists, everyone's supporting this, and it's like, subhanallah, like what kind of world are we living in?
In fact, it's one of the strangest things, because this now brings us all, including Muslims, myself included, that we've had alliances with the left on various issues, especially to do with the war on terrorism. But now that it has shifted, and now that this has happened, and now, as you've said, that there are these movements from within the left, and we should have always known. Sometimes it's left, sometimes it's right, sometimes it's neither, sometimes it's both who are against Islam. And we need to bear that in mind and pick our battles, as it were. The issue here really now has to be that we've got to, out of this, create a movement, as I said, so that we can stand up together. The left are now put through conspiracy theories. They'll say, the very left that used to support us on the issues of war on terrorism against America will say, oh, well, this is all lies, it's not true. How could 3 million people be in the organ harvesting? That's just all fake. It's all that same language, the denial, basically, that we hear. So we need to choose allies. If we can't find allies from amongst ourselves, we need to find allies from people who are capable, bearing in mind that those alliances can shift very, very quickly.
Yeah, definitely. Brother Moazzam, I want to thank you so much for joining me today. Is there anything else that you wanted to say or add? And it doesn't have to be about the Uyghurs. Maybe there's an event coming up, not necessarily about the Uyghurs, that you wanted to plug here today. I'll let you do that.
I mean, no, because we've been speaking about the Uyghurs, I feel that this is the thing that I should speak of. And to me, as I said, one of the most important things that has come come to me about this recent period in the past 2 to 3 years, though I know that the plight of the Uyghurs have been going on for far, far longer, is that the momentum is with the movement. The momentum is with the Uyghurs. The language, the people are with them, and let us not drop the ball there. And things like this are very, very important. It needs to be shared widely. It needs to be put amongst the Muslim community. I'll give you an example. There was one Uyghur family that moved here to Birmingham. There are no Uyghurs here at all. And it's a former Guantanamo prisoner. And, the family moved here, and they moved into a place where they had no knowledge of anybody at all, not the area or anything. But they moved next to both Muslim neighbors on both sides. And the way they welcomed them, I cannot describe. They didn't know anything about the Uyghurs at all. These were very simple Muslim people. But when they found out, their hearts went out to them so much so they took their kids to school. They looked after the kids. The father had to go off working somewhere else. And literally, they were taken care of as if they were family. And if that's one drop of hope, because people are Uyghurs, when people started to find out, they couldn't do much. But what they could do is say, we'll welcome you here. And I want people to have that feeling around the Muslim world for our brothers and sisters from East Turkestan.
Jazakallah khairan, brother. Thank you for your wisdom, your advice, what you've been through yourself. You've definitely shed a light, and what you said before, that subhanallah, the Muslims, as you said, many of the Islamophobes see us as one. We should at least aim to be one. Try and get back to the concept of the ummah, which we are, and the Uyghurs are definitely a part of, but we definitely feel forgotten. And so I want everyone to sort of let's get back to that. So, brother, Jazakallah khairan for joining me today.
Barakallah feekum, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bring relief and ease and victory to our people and our brothers and sisters from Turkestan, the Sharqiya, from East Turkestan, and to unite us all on the word of truth. Ameen.
Amin Ismail. Thank you to our dear audience. Make sure you guys share this message. The Uyghurs plight, it's still happening. Many countries are now calling this a genocide. It really is a Uyghur Holocaust happening in the 21st century. Until next time, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Salam.